Our keynote speaker is Clara Miller. Clara is the president of the F.B. Heron Foundation, a post she earned after founding and leading the Nonprofit Finance Fund from 1984 to 2011. The Nonprofit Finance Fund serves as a philanthropic bank for both social sector organizations and their funders and has invested and managed more than $1.5 billion in financing for social sector organizations. In addition to serving on the F.B. Heron Foundation's board, Clara is on the boards of the Family Independence Initiative, the Sustainability Accounting Standards Board, Stonecastle Financial Corp., and the Robert Sterling Foundation. She is a member of the Social Investment Committee of the Kresge Foundation, the U.S. National Advisory Board to the G8 Social Impact Task Force, and in 2010 became the first member of the Nonprofit Advisory Committee for the Financial Accounting Standards Board, bringing our values into the mainstream. Clara was the inaugural laureate of the Prince's Prize for Innovative Philanthropy in 2014 from the Prince Albert II of Monaco Foundation and the Tocqueville Foundation Institute of France. She was named the Nonprofit Times Power and Influence Top 50 for the 5 years from 2006 to 2010 and received a Bellagio residency in 2010 by the Rockefeller Foundation. She has many, many other accolades. All the full bio is in your materials, but I don't want to steal any more time for her incredible keynote talk this morning. I thank you so much and have a wonderful symposium.
Luckily, I wore the same thing as is in my photographs. Don't have that many clothes. Okay. So thank you very much, and thank you for inviting me to this venue. It's thrilling. I mean, high water women. Who could not like this idea and this name? I'm just going to give you a little background on the Heron Foundation for those of you who don't know us. The foundation is over 20 years old. It's not a very old foundation by foundation standards. We have a self-help mission. Our mission is to help people in communities help themselves out of poverty and thrive. And we have a long tradition. Long before I arrived in 2011, the foundation was a leader in impact investing, in pushing itself to think of all of its resources as philanthropic resources, not just its grant budget, and to always be trying to do more. But when I arrived in 2011, as is the wont, anybody who's been in the foundation world knows that when a new president arrives and says, there's a new president, we're going to do strategic planning, the entire nonprofit sector goes, no, this is terrible. But we were no different at the time. The difference was we went into a reset that was driven internally. Staff, board, people of long-standing at Heron, people, new arrivals like me, kind of took stock. And first thing we said to ourselves was, gee, the world has changed. There are mega trends that have changed all of our reliable assumptions about how people can get out of poverty. And we took a look also at the 28 financial crisis, and we had to admit that the people we wanted to help the most had been hurt the most in that financial crisis. And the people who emerged unscathed were not necessarily the people who needed to be helped the most. And most troubling, I think, it seemed like our strategy might even have done some harm. Like many of us in the community development world, we thought of solutions as kind of access solutions. Access to a loan, so a person could buy a home. Access to training, so a person could get a job. Access generally to education, because that was the path upward. And when we took stock, we said to ourselves, actually, access to a reliable economy has always been an assumption, and that assumption is no longer true. We're building essentially access to a job that doesn't exist. And if you have assets that you've built, or debt, especially if you've acquired assets with debt, you don't have to be a rocket scientist to know that you put yourself at risk if you don't have reliable income from a reliable job. That's what leads to big problems, and it did for all of the people we had so much wanted to help. So in addition to that, so we started to say to ourselves, really what we need is reliable jobs for people in poverty. And in fact, a lot of the programs that helped treat kind of the witch's brew of social ills, the nexus was a home without a job. So drug and alcohol abuse, low school achievement, domestic violence, problem getting credit and housing, youth delinquency in gangs. Without a job in the house, those kinds of problems only got worse and tended to persist. So we decided to alter our approach and not look at the margins, say to ourselves, poverty is actually no longer marginal, it's structural. How do we go to work on the structural poverty and the root cause of a lot of what we were seeing, which was lack of entry-level employment, lack of employment with family livelihood as a added plus, and the brass ring, employment with both livelihood and opportunity for all. In other words, a real chance to go up the ladder. For us, we thought of it as simply keeping the American promise and simply being pragmatic about poverty. If in fact our mission was to help people in communities help themselves out of poverty, that was the kind of pragmatic way. Brave words. Let's, okay, a $300 million foundation ends unemployment tomorrow, right, by Monday morning. And as somebody said to me quite tartly, $300 million of an endowment is kind of like a rounding error on a rounding error of one day of the New York City economy. So, okay. So in order to be even the slightest bit real about that as a goal, we decided, all right, all bets are off. All of Heron's assets are philanthropic assets. It's not just, and when I arrived, we had about 40% of our endowment was in mission-related and program-related investment. So we said, well, why are we stopping at 40%? Let's do 100%. So the problem is outsized, the problem is urgent. Why are we holding back? Why aren't we going full on? And particularly because we're talking about making changes to the real economy, not picking up the pieces where the economy has failed, which is what philanthropy's traditional work has been. We're saying it's not that. We don't just want to solve problems, we want to stanch the flow of problems. We don't want to scale the nonprofit world. We actually want to shrink it by shrinking the problems that are coming its way. We want the nonprofit world to be marginal because we want the economy to be working for everybody. And the second precept, we're all in it together. This is a pogo moment. It's not the 99% and the 1%, it's the 100%. We can't have an economy that works for everybody and have a larger and larger proportion of our society being poor and failure being standard. So, fine. How did we reinvent once we had decided, all right, this is the way we have to operate? How do we operate to support an urgent need in philanthropy. I had a friend once who said, there are no philanthropic emergencies. and having raised money from foundations for 28 years of my career, I can say that this is not a sector on the grants side that turns around and is market oriented and says, consumers are going to get mad at us. People who want grants are going to go away and seek grants elsewhere. We're going to lose customers if we're not responsive. So we needed to sort of say to ourselves, how do we build a market responsive model? How do we put all of our assets to work for our cause? First of all, we redefined our enterprise, meaning we've redefined the foundation. We have one capital deployment unit. For those of you familiar with the foundation business model, sometimes it's described, and this audience will appreciate it, as a hedge fund with a small giving program attached to it. So we basically put those into one place. We combined giving and investing in one team that was called capital deployment. Part of the reason we did that is that we needed all our brains in one room. We couldn't act like somehow the program was happening out here and the money was happening here. Those things go together. And in great investing, those things are inextricably bound together. If you're going to actually have enterprises contributing value to society, investors as bankers and as stewards, really, of good enterprise can make a tremendous difference and impact. And we wanted that to be what Heron was doing. We developed an investment policy that was quite different from the standard, which includes now prominently something that foundations actually have, which is a fiduciary duty of obedience to mission. So it's our position that you don't get to decide that you're going to make all of your assets mission-oriented. It's actually built into your fiduciary responsibility. We believe very strongly in shared success, so that the risks covered by our investment policies include beneficiary risk. We are there to try to help enterprise succeed, because if they succeed, they will employ people. If they employ people, people will come out of poverty. This is our, very simple, straightforward mission, theory of change. And for integrity's sake, we track financial and social metrics. And when I say social, it's broadly construed to mean environmental, social, and governance. That performance on all of our assets are assessed and tracked together over time, in real time, just as they are for financial, but social and financial together, across all asset classes and legal forms of organization. This is a lot of work, and it's not fully built yet, but we believe that to have integrity doing what we want to do, we have to start building the tracking infrastructure and the accounting standards that make that possible. We take the enterprise view, which is different from taking asset allocation view. We take a bottoms up. What are enterprises actually doing that we're investing in, as opposed to what are asset classes giving us as an investor? So we're looking at that level. And finally, and we've chosen a specific financial role that is mission aligned. And that financial role is as a growth capital provider. And that's not only in our investment portfolio, it's in our grant making as well. We want to finance the growth of strong established companies. That's because we want reliable employment for the most vulnerable people in this society. And you need a strong company to do that, not necessarily a startup. That doesn't mean we don't think startups are important. It's just not our financial role, and we're very specific about that. Finally, we've over time, learned, as we're doing, and we have a kind of a redefined market orientation. We said to ourselves, gee whiz, 100% of mission isn't enough. I mean, $300 million, come on. And so we have to figure out how we can make what we're doing meaningful beyond our walls. So once we started looking at the range of opportunity out there, it's a whole new world, and it's a wonderful one. So we've come to a place of really looking at abundance and opportunism and building ourselves as a platform, as opposed to a closed bubble, or a terrarium, as I like to call it, where the endowment and the grantees and the investments are all inside, and we're very happy and smug about what we're doing, but it's not necessarily changing the world, right? So we've adopted 3 battle cries, as it were. The first one is, all investing is impact investing. The impact might be bad, the impact might be good, the impact might be neutral, but everything, all of those investments are having impact on our world. And so pretending that it's only the good investments we want to track, or that once you've designated an organization good, it can never have negative mission results, is not going to change the economy, right? It's not going to change the way we do business and think about ourselves. The second battle cry, which is one of my favorites, is accounting is destiny. I know, it's catchy. It brings tears to the eyes when you're trying to get grants for accounting infrastructure. There's a reason I'm on the board of the Sustainability Accounting Standards Board, on a committee of FASB, and that one of the things that we're funding is Cometrics, which is a data warehouse for common reporting from different industry verticals among small business and cooperatives and nonprofits. We're a supply chain. We need the infrastructure to be able to see where we fit in that, where the organizations we're funding, how they're doing, and to have some data standards that have real integrity, and that will have real integrity over time. SASB, for example, is talking about, is developing data standards for public company reporting. So it's not just nonprofits who report on their social metrics. It's got to be all enterprises across all asset classes. And finally, where's the third battle cry? Good grief, I lost it. Yikes. So we are on a supply chain, as I said, and we are at Heron are hardly a lone prophetic voice. We know that, and the third battle cry is that investing itself, our investing in particular, but investing in this space, must be an influence strategy. We can't possibly accomplish this by ourselves. We need to have everybody from public companies to bodegas, from universities to volunteer ambulance corps. And yes, of course, we have to have hedge funds. Thank you. And I would be delighted and thrilled to have questions. I really like that better than giving a talk. So please, if you have questions or comments, please let me address them. Yes, back there. There's a microphone up here, so it'd be good so that everybody can hear the question too.
I was hoping that you could elaborate a little bit on your thought of, redefining access to perhaps enhancing, obtaining jobs or getting jobs available to people. Could you speak more about what that means specifically and how you're accomplishing that?
Sure. So while I think it's important for me to say that I'm not saying it's not important to get job training, and it's not important for people for access strategies to be funded. It's just that our view is that you have to improve the reliable supply of jobs, or else we're training people for things that may or may not exist. Some of the best versions of this really have to do with companies that in combination with job training programs develop ways to train their own workforce, essentially. There are companies that have really remarkable human capital programs within them that consider their people a major resource, not an expense item. So that's what we look for. And we try to finance those companies and bring them up the chain. We don't assume that all of the solutions to problems have to exist in the nonprofit sector. In fact, if they do, we're sunk. Those problems are best solved, I think, and most creatively in many cases, right where they're happening. And it's an exciting thing to see companies get excited about hiring and work.
Yes. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about the Family Independence Initiative and how that peer learning model is actually helping the people in the community to drive their own futures.
I'm sorry.
Are you on the board of the Family Independence Initiative?
Oh, yes. I'm on the board of Family Independence Initiative. It's for those of you who don't know it, and now I'm going to test the limits of my board membership hat here. They have an amazing model, which is essentially based on a combination of high tech and tradition. The traditional immigrant kind of family unit coming over and cohering around taking folks up the ladder is one element of this. And the second is shared data, which will give a group that's not necessarily joined by ethnicity or family bonds, visibility into each other's statistics, kind of, and build trust and also build competition at the same time, that kind of cooperative and competitive bit. And these family groups come together to solve their own problems. And FII's model is essentially to not send folks to solve other people's problems, but to support and provide funds and provide access to all sorts of things as the families decide they need them in order to get them up the curve. And that might include access to microenterprise loans. It might include job training. It might include all sorts of things, but it is essentially a self-help model. It's been remarkably successful. There's great statistics on it, not only in FII, but throughout the history of this country. So, yes.
Now we give Janet.
Okay.
Oh, sorry.
Thank you very much for
being right-handed out here.
Thank you very much for starting us off on exactly the right note. And your reference to the size of the assets of the foundation reminds me of the Emily principle. Early money is like yeast. And I think beyond the size or the amount that the foundation has mobilized, I do think in terms of your third principle that you also are bringing others along. I wonder if you would say a word, give us a little bit of a sense of that ecosystem of other foundations stepping forward alongside the Heron Foundation. What is the outlook for others adopting your philosophy of partnership with the private sector and catalyzing and looking toward more of a seeing all sectors together in this?
Right. I think it's interesting because I think that there are some foundations who are utterly allergic to this idea, and there's a very strong dual culture of grant making versus investing, and it's complicated. I don't think and Heron's relatively small and has a long history. So, but I think more powerfully, and there are some foundations who are 100, KL Felicitas has been in this space, there's a whole group. But what's even more compelling for us is that we're discovering it's social investment. So, you know, folks like Omidyar have a very different model from a conventional foundation. There are family offices out there and families who are just investing their own funds for social results, for social and financial performance together. So I think that what happens when you step outside the foundation, the protective foundation terrarium, there's a whole world out there of people doing things, and some of them are foundations, but it's not as important. I would love it if the foundation community turned as one tomorrow and said, look, let's figure out what we're going to do to make all of our dollars really, really working hard for mission. But, you know, it could happen. There's some interest. And there's also tends to be, you know, a kind of a stealth approach, because changing culture inside a big institution is a tough, tough job. Not happening fast.
Clara, Shelley Welpton, I really appreciate your bold envisioning and action and example in the sector. And my question to you is, as you think about your influence strategy, I would love to hear you talk a little bit about the role of public policy. There are many interesting ideas on the table. There's some exciting experiments. There's a lot of buzz. But for me, that's very different from a mobilized, focused community and strategy for, you know, building that political will and getting public policy results. I'd love to hear how you think about your role in the sector and what you think
we've talked a lot about policy at Heron and there's a lot of people doing policy that focuses on Washington, let's say, and we want to change this law or get a program funded and so on. And we've kind of stepped back from that, not because we don't think it's important, but because we don't think that adding another marginal dollar to that is going to do anything. I guess this is a kind of a silly joke, but it's a real joke. We said to ourselves, well, gosh, you know, now that corporations actually have government in their pocket, why are we going to the government? Why don't we just go directly to the corporations? And so, you know, I don't like to be, you know, silly about this, but in a way, that's what's happening. I mean, there is a pogo moment here. We have met the enemy, and it is us. And, you know, there's a famous Jeb Ellison statement, you can't have successful companies in a failed society. So at a certain point, it's going to be, and I think that point is now, it is in the deep self-interest of companies of all types all over the country. There's no, you know, there's no division where there's government doing one thing and companies doing another. And let's have the companies go and make demands from the government beyond just make sure you insure us and fund our reliable revenue from government contracts. So I think that's my ambition. I don't know if it's realistic, but at least it's slightly different than what we've been doing before. But I do support a whole bunch of Washington-based and state initiatives on policy.
Great. Thank you.
Sure.
I'm Nina Chen from the Nature Conservancy. Thank you very much to come speak to us. I really admire your foundation's focus on creating jobs and working with private enterprise to create jobs. With the advance of technology, a lot of companies can create huge values without much employment. I wonder, in your investment focus, do you then focus on companies that provide a lot of employments, which, like, for example, I'm just thinking like Alibaba, which was one of the largest IPOs, only employ like 20,000 people. So with the new economy of technology, how do you make investments in creating jobs for average people who are not necessarily
This is the $300 million question, for sure. It's a great question. What is, and I can't say we've answered it. I can say we do not have a stake in Alibaba. But, and I'm a both and kind of girl. I think that there are versions of this where there's lots of value being created for society and really good jobs. But there's a continuum. And some of it is, and I think we're still trying to solve the problem of the future of work. And it's not just for, in fact, if anything, jobs at the very bottom of the ladder are increasing faster than jobs in the middle. It's a disintermediation problem, and that will include doctors and lawyers too. It's not just, and bankers. It's, yikes! It's not just going to include people at the bottom of the ladder. So I think it goes beyond just, just us, obviously, and just investing. It's a global problem and question to be examined. I don't have the answer, and it's a great question.
Good morning, Clara. Hi, Fran Siegel from Impact Assets. You spoke about the refreshment of your investment policy statement, and I know that some of the people in this room, when you read it, when I read it, and you made it public, and we all read it, were very moved by it. And in fact, one person I was talking to about your investment policy statement cried when they read it, which I think
I love this. This is the only room, okay, in the world.
Probably the first.
I'll talk about taxes, and we'll talk about accounting later, okay?
Yes, the first time in history that someone has wept at an investment policy statement. And,
I love it.
and so I was wondering if you could share a little bit about the process of that investment policy statement refreshment and any advice for those of us in the audience that have IPSs that could use some refreshment. So
Kate Starr, where are you, Kate, is in the audience. She and I and a bunch of people on, she has been head of capital deployment for Heron, has been a tremendous partner to me and to the board in this whole process, and was a prime mover in the investment policy statement. And we went back and forth. We first had a kind of a disastrous couple of interns from Yale. And it's not Yale, okay? We thought, okay, great, Yale, smart, right? But of course, they had been trained in the Yale endowment. And so they came up with this thing, and we kind of thought, we thought, okay, this is going to be okay. And we put it, we presented it to our board, and they just hated it. And we hated it then too. We actually hated it, but we weren't sure. Then we were sure we hated it. So we went back to the drawing board, and we kind of started from, okay, what's really important to us? And, we tried to be very pragmatic. There was the aspect of where the rubber meets the road and where the rubber meets the sky, and we had to kind of bring them together. But it was iteration and reiteration, sending it out to friends and family over a number of weeks, months. And then really sort of settling down on the bullet points, I think, where we said, okay, these are our, kind of rock solid precepts that are different from the investment policy statements of yore that are all about protecting the assets, and they're all about top down now. This is about what we want to accomplish as a philanthropic institution. This is about our fiduciary duty of obedience to mission. So I think that's the signal change.
Thank you.
Kerwin.
Kerwin Tezo from the Community Development Venture Capital Alliance. Hi, Clara.
Hi.
So you mentioned your growth capital strategy. Could you expand a little bit on that? What does growth capital look like as compared with capital?
Thank you for that question. So most of the time if you're a philanthropist, so I'll talk about it from the point of view of grant making, because it's less clear in the grant making world than in, I think, the for-profit world. But we we think of grants as kind of blobs of love. They really aren't money, right? They aren't exactly, they're kind of, we're paying for something. But it's not a crisp financial tool in the way that we're not either using it to buy services or as revenue for the organization, or we're using it as capital, either for change or growth or startup or something that will then attract reliable revenue. So those roles, those kind of financial roles are unclear in the grant world. We only make what we call growth capital grants. It's typically growth stage, meaning organization has a proven business model, strong management team, and has a real opportunity to attract reliable revenue that will power its growth and make it a sustainable company. And it's delivering social value already to the people we care about. And so that then changes the entire conversation. Somebody comes in for a grant and we say, well, what's the reliable revenue you're going to attract? We're not making, our average grant size used to be $75,000. That's about average for social sector organizations for the 1,000 largest foundations in the country. 75,000 is average. Our average grant size is now 1.5 million. And it's typically part of a campaign that is up somewhere between 5 million and 15 million. That is what it actually will take to get that nonprofit organization up the growth curve in exactly the same way as it would for a venture capital company to invest in a for-profit where the lines cross and it's sustainable. It's just we leave the return inside the nonprofit. Can't own a nonprofit. But the principle by which we provide that kind of investment is exactly the same. And same for most of the companies, the private equity, we look for even private companies that we can invest alongside a private equity company, a variety of things. It's almost always growth stage. Is that clear? Okay. Yes.
Hi, Clara. I'm Joan Trant from TriLink Global.
Hi.
Thank you for sharing Heron Foundation's playbook with us. It's fabulous. Just following on the last two questions, can you give us an example of an actual investment you've made and kind of take us from how did you identify it, diligence it, kind of how you structure a transaction, then how you monitor it for both the financial and the social performance?
Sure.
Thank you. Sorry.
Gosh. So I'm going to talk about, I should say before I get started that most of our investing is actually not direct. It's in funds, or we have a mandate to a fund that is screened. So the bulk of our money, just because we're not very big, our staff isn't very big, so we can't be actually doing direct investing in every single position. We have 7,700 positions at the Heron Foundation, which is arguably too many, but anyway. So I will talk to you a little about an organization that was one of our venerable members of our growth capital portfolio for grants. It's Paraprofessional Healthcare Institute, PHI as it's called. The top company is a not-for-profit 501c3 organization. It's around $11 million of turnover. There's two, not subsidiaries, but affiliates. One of them is the largest for-profit cooperative of home health workers in the country. They're in the South Bronx here in New York. And the other is a managed care, essentially an insurance company. It's around $250 to $300 million. And because of demographic changes, because of changes in the healthcare law, because of a variety of things, there was a huge growth opportunity for PHI. And what that top nonprofit company did was to stand guard at the door of mission. It trained the workers on the principle of raising floors and building ladders. So not only did it try to create better work situations for home health workers now and train them. It also tried to build career path ladders by having training online and a variety of other advocacy services. But this was it's going to be a nonprofit organization. It's not going to turn into a for-profit. It's going to have some earned income, but it probably will have to increase its revenue model by by diversifying its fundraising and getting much more kind of person power behind individual donor development. So that's that's the opportunity for growth and for investment in the business model. So we do, as you know, I worked in the CDFI world at Nonprofit Finance Fund for years and did some lending to nonprofit organizations. So I have intimate knowledge, for better or for worse, of the positive and negative opportunity there in those business models and how to look at and track their growth over time. We did due diligence. It's very similar to anything you do at a bank. The difference is that if you imagine the banking profitability 2 by 2 as simple and complicated on the left-hand side and large and small across the top. There's large and simple, that would be the most profitable part of the banking world. Well, we're in the small and complicated part of the banking world. So we do a very thorough job of underwriting, partly because we want to make sure we mitigate risk to the organization that we are investing in, and therefore to mitigate beneficiary risk. We want to get behind organizations and see them succeed and do everything we can to make them succeed. So PHI has closed, it's got a $9 million total and is doing it in segments. It closed its first $3 million fundraise and now it's embarking on its second. Among the things that PHI did, and to get back to the policy question, they do remarkable policy advocacy, and one of their achievements was to get home health workers covered under the minimum wage laws here in New York State in 2010. That was billions of dollars to people who are working really hard and will be taking care of many people in this room probably in the near future, and who we want to make sure are well-trained and well-paid and happy. So anyway, that's the story of PHI. Other questions? Guess we're done. Thank you.